again, Cantaloupe here with part 2 of the study on how to create a user login system for a Vue.js app. So if you saw the first part, I left off with what I said was just a possibly mild bug that I was still working on, and it turned out to take actually longer than the whole first part of that video that I recorded. So it was actually a little difficult to track down just at first. So let me jump back into this process so you can watch it. So debugging, I've very briefly touched on in past videos, is an art form and a very large subject if you're going to explore it properly. There's a lot of tricks and techniques to identify where the problem is, to trace it through the code. Obviously, error messages are super helpful. Finding the error messages is a challenge in itself. Sometimes you see something in the console, but sometimes you don't. You have to figure out why that is. The most difficult error to trace is the one that has no message or no indication. So you just know that something's not right because the program's not working, and you gotta maybe start from scratch. And in this case, I was having quite a few different problems with the login because it was not connecting to the database correctly, and what I ended up doing was kind of just reviewing all the code that I had imported. I also spoke previously about how you can reuse modules and files from other projects, and that's why it's good to keep them separate so that you can reuse them. The downside to that is sometimes there are little unique features and details that don't quite jive with your new environment, whatever it is. So that was kind of the challenge I was repeatedly running into. And to make a long story short, it was kind of just a long session of tracing errors and bugs until it all fit together. So it's done, and the takeaway for this video and kind of an ongoing learning experience for me in developing is that there's a trade-off, as I mentioned, and it's not always best to reuse code to use components and modules from other projects. I mean, you can, of course, and it sometimes saves you a lot of time, and sometimes it's almost as much work as if you had just started over. And a lot of people are going to disagree with that. A lot of coders and professional developers might not agree with that philosophy that modularity is not hugely valuable. I mean, it is. It's a good thing to keep in mind, the possibility that other people might want to use those modules, or if you're on a team, you're collaborating perhaps, and it's good to keep things compartmentalized as much as possible. But the downside is you lose a little bit of customizability, and there's always going to be a need for that. Unless you're making just absolutely vanilla generic applications that don't really do anything special, they're just serving vague general purposes, but that's almost never the case. So you're going to have little idiosyncrasies that you've got to cater to in your code, and when you have a canned solution, whether it's a third-party solution or even your own solution, you're going to run into these little errors and things that don't connect. So bottom line is I almost ended up rewriting half of the code that I had imported. So 6 of one, half dozen the other. It got done, and it looks good and it works completely at the end, but I almost would have been better just completely writing it from scratch again. So just something to think about. But as far as the specific features and issues that I had with this particular login prompt, I was very focused on getting it completed in a way that wasn't, pardon the expression, half-assed. I don't like to do anything half. If it's worth doing right, pardon the expression. But So that means, in this case, it means not only having, obviously a login button, which is the bare minimum for a login system. You can't do that without a button. There's something. And it's going to need, a way to register. It's going to need what else might you think about when you think about, a very basic profile management system? You're going to probably want to be able to change your password. Obviously, you're going to want to be able to log out, which, you don't think about this stuff necessarily. Logging out seems so, commonplace. You don't even think that it would be a thing, but you got to actually, write perhaps a whole script just for that. And that's what I did. So it's got login, it's got log out, it's got password changing, it's got avatars. So I actually kind of made a fairly full-featured user profile management system, and it uses some of the things I described in the last video as far as password protection on the server side, and I touched briefly on why it's a really bad idea to store plain text passwords or clear text passwords, because obviously it's just wide open if somebody can see your database, or employees even, or yourself. That's just, it's disrespectful to your customers, your users, I guess. It's just bad practice. And the naive approach to solving that, again, to repeat what I said, is you might think, well, I'll hash it. If you know what a hash is, it's you take input, any kind of input, can be a whole file or nothing or a single character, and it spits out a completely unique string of characters to represent the data that you put into it. That output is a fixed length, usually 32 or 64 characters or something like that. Not too long, but it's unique enough so that you can avoid collisions with basically a perfect hashing algorithm will output something completely unique that won't represent any other type of data except what you put into it. So the naive approach to password obfuscation, if you know the word, is to hash it. Okay, so now you can't see the password and it's irreversible. But what if, now here's what I didn't cover in the last video, what if your data is compromised? Now you have to think about these things because it happens a lot. It happens every day. Somebody's server, somebody's firewall is hacked, and while for my application that's not a huge deal because there's no personal information contained therein, it's bad practice to store passwords like that. So if somebody got a hold of the databases, say they got into the server and they exported the whole database, so they've got all these hashes. They don't have passwords, they've got hashes, right? And they've got all the time in the world to analyze it and apply what I mentioned last time, rainbow tables, which is just these absurdly big databases of all the possible 16 character combinations or less of any kind of password that anybody could possibly come up with, and it just tries them all. That's called brute force. And if your hash is a direct thing from the password, they can find it, unless you use what's called password salting. And that is, like I said, it generates a completely unique hash. It's the same idea, except you can't just reverse look it up like that. It's just got a little bit of extra information in there that the program, PHP in this case, can verify because it's part of its own system, but you can't reverse look it up because it's going to be different every time. The same input's going to come out different every time. So it's a really well thought out system. It's robust and it's secure, and that's why I'm using that, but not to beat a dead horse. So it's got that feature. It's got the avatar, the user password. It's got registration, which perhaps you'd want to tie that to something personal, like an email account. I'm not doing that. I've thought a lot about that, but and I have in the past with projects I've required perhaps some kind of verification of who the person is. I am not philosophically aligned with a need to delve into personal details like that. I don't believe it's a proactive approach to managing technology or users. I believe that if your users if your users aren't able to be anonymous, you have a bigger problem. And trying to micromanage their logins and their data isn't a solution. It really isn't. So it's a big conference. That's almost a whole separate video of it. So long story short, I allow anonymous registration, like a lot of websites, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing untoward or it's a philosophy that's not shared by a lot of websites, contemporary websites. So, not to call anybody out, but Facebook, for example, Meta, the new company name is Meta. They have had a long-standing, Mark Zuckerberg has a long-standing policy of non-anonymity. They try to establish a link with the individual that can be verified and traced if needed, and that's kind of like their solution to problems when that's that kind of whole keep people honest thing. And I get it, I understand that point of view, but I don't think it's a solution because there's always a way around it. It's not enforceable. It's still possible to whenever you're dealing with a network and remote access, remote registration, there's no way to conclusively determine who is logging in and using your system. Anyway, I have gone on, and the login is done. It's completely done. So you see it, and it's working, and you're free to check the code. This is all open source, and I'm going to put a link here. So reach out to me via email if you have any questions, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you.